Let's go over a fairly recent article that was published by ABC 7 Eyewitness News of Los Angeles and Southern California. The title of the article is Dozens of Businesses Facing ADA Lawsuits. One claims LA restaurant's website wasn't accessible. And then as we scroll down to the beginning of the article, we are met with a familiar fact pattern. A person who is legally blind is suing an Echo Park restaurant, claiming its website violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. This same person has filed dozens of lawsuits over the last few years. We have an initial quote from the restaurant owner. The restaurant is Sticky Rice. The owner is Brian Sharofka. Just as a business, it's really scary to get this court summons in the mail. And we do not, it says the lawsuit claims the plaintiff had problems with access, but we don't see the specific accessibility issues that are being claimed. And then we have a quote from Sharofka. Had somebody let me know that, hey, your website doesn't work for blind people, we would have done our best to accommodate that. And as soon as that was brought to our attention, we added that. All right, so 2 points about this quote. This is a sentiment that I've heard from multiple website owners, that being, especially small businesses, that being, hey, if you would have just let us know you had a problem with access, we would have helped to ensure that you did have access. But that is not the current climate we are in. The current climate is that plaintiffs' lawyers are sending demand letters and filing complaints in court, and then the discussion begins. And then also on the second part, on the last part of this quote, and as soon as that was brought to our attention, we added that. So that struck me because you don't add accessibility. You remediate for accessibility. You fix your website so that it is accessible, but you do not add accessibility. So now let's go to the Sticky Rice website, and I will try to demonstrate something really fast. So I suspected that he meant that an overlay widget was installed, and indeed an overlay widget was installed. We're on the Sticky Rice website.
Welcome to NVDA Spicy Lob Salad.
And the overlay widget is in the top right-hand corner. It is a green button. And so now I have a screen reader activated, and we're just going to briefly use a screen reader because I want to demonstrate something.
OK button pressed. Sticky. Career. Mainlet. Content info landmark home link.
All right,
menu link.
I've tabbed down
link.
Now to the bottom of the website.
Visited link. Navigation landmark Instagram.
All right.
Open in a new tab link.
Now let's listen to what happens when I tab to the overlay widget button.
Clickable button.
It just says clickable button. We don't know what this button is. So right there, we have an accessibility issue, but I'm not going to activate the button. I'm going to continue to tab.
Invert colors button.
All right, so we just went to a button setting within the overlay widget, but I did not activate the widget. So the menu of settings is not open, and yet now we are tabbing through that menu of settings, and we have also lost focus on the website. So this continues on, and I'll just tab a few more times.
Dark contrast button. Highlight links button.
All right, again, we do not have a focus indicator on the page, so we do not know where we are on the page. If we are tabbing by a keyboard, I'm going to go ahead and go back.
Dark invert colors button.
So we just have that generic button. What is the button? So I'm going to go ahead and click enter, and then we see the menu of options come up, and there are looks like there are 8 different options. And then so we have this overlay widget, and this is a different style than I usually see from UserWay, but this is a different overlay widget, just a different kind. They really are basically the same. They might have different settings. They might look a certain different style, but this is what an overlay widget really is doing, is it's rendering superficial adjustments. It offers superficial adjustments that lay over a website, hence the term overlay. So this isn't actually making the website accessible. It's really just a toolbar that is there. There might be some nominal benefit, but of course there can also be some detriment. As I just mentioned, accessibility issues were actually introduced in the case of this overlay. But as I said, not all UserWay setups are like this, so I don't know if this is a custom setup. But the point here is that an overlay widget does not make your website accessible. It does not make your website ADA compliant. you need to fundamentally address both your code and your content. So you have to remediate those to make them accessible, because otherwise all we have are these superficial adjustments. If someone wants to use the overlay, then they have to undergo a learning curve, decide what settings they want to adjust. Then they have to adjust these settings. And we would rather, it's best, in fact, it is mandatory that the website is accessible and that you do not have to go through this learning curve to make possible adjustments. Also, there are clearly limitations to the adjustments because, again, I said there are only 8 different adjustments that can be made here. So we have invert colors, dark contrast, highlight links, bigger text, pause animations, legible fonts, big cursor, reset all. That is only, these are only really, um, you know, basically like enhanced options that can potentially affect accessibility. This is more like user preferences than it is accessibility. So we need to make our websites inherently accessible. So we have to address the code and the content. So this is just this is just one overlay widget. There are different kinds, but there are no overlay widgets that are going to make your website accessible. In fact, we know there are literally hundreds of lawsuits where the website owners had an overlay widget installed and were nevertheless sued. So I think this is really important for website owners to know about. But now I am going to go ahead and shut off the screen reader.
Okay, Tom Cost.
All right, and let's go back to the article and finish this article off. And then after that quote, we have Dan Dene, an attorney who is not connected to this case, defends businesses against 88 lawsuits. He said when it comes to website accessibility lawsuits, they don't have a clear standard of reasonable accessibility. The quote is, "I can't tell you what number of errors is too many or what number of errors is acceptable. What combination of errors is acceptable?" I dislike this statement, and especially is the statement along with the quote. And it's not that it's necessarily wrong, but just based on what's in this article, I read it as defeatism. And especially if I'm thinking of from the point of view of your small business owner who has a website, you read this about this statement and this quote from this attorney who's defending these cases. It's like, what hope is there? It doesn't sound like there's a path forward. So people have to know that WCAG conformance is best practice. If your website fully conforms to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as long as that may take or as expensive as that may be, then you really wouldn't. You're very unlikely to be sued. If you were, you could immediately defend against that. I think it would get dismissed because there wouldn't be any accessibility issues. And in that case, the plaintiff's law firms wouldn't have looked at the website at all. But also, you can make your website increasingly more unattractive to plaintiff's lawyers by fixing the issues that they are most likely to claim. And that is my ADA compliance course, right? That is what I get into. Is I get into these 15 most commonly claimed issues, and I tell you exactly how to find and fix them with code examples so that you significantly reduce your risk of litigation as you are working on website accessibility. So you're improving your accessibility and you're lowering your risk of being sued as you go through and complete the lessons in the course. And when I say complete, I mean you are taking those lessons and applying them to your website. So I didn't like the quote, although, I will say that when you get quoted, it doesn't always come out the way that you intend, and media outlets, journalists have a way of extracting what they want rather than the full picture that you provide. So to be fair to that attorney, and then we have a few quotes from the plaintiff's lawyer, Joe Manning of Manning Law APC. Manning Law is fairly active in website accessibility litigation. There's a quote: "The blind and visually impaired must have access to websites and apps to fully and equally participate in modern society, something nobody disputes." He wrote, "This outcome furthers that critical objective for them and is a credit to our society." So when he says that outcome, the problem here is that the plaintiff's lawyer stands to gain a windfall, right? Because they are injecting themselves into this, and we don't, let's get to the accessibility and not the plaintiff's lawyer receiving money. So I think that's where people have a problem with it. It's not the accessibility part; it's that the plaintiff's lawyers are being enriched part. And there is no credit to society for plaintiffs' lawyers being enriched, by through serial litigation. Plaintiffs' law firms that are involved in genuine litigation. We want them to be rewarded because they are helping balance things out and ensure rights are protected. But in this case, we just have lawsuits being filed over and over and over again, and the plaintiffs, more often than not, much more often than not, are not genuinely trying to avail themselves of the products and services of the websites for the website owners they are suing. Um, let's see. Manning said that he does not comment. He said he considers steps like the prompt remediation of a website, making the website accessible, and the impact of the case on the defendant when he's attempting to resolve a case. It would be very interesting to know what the impact of that is in terms of dollar amount in the settlement. Uh, he said, "I'm also aware that some people oppose the ability of persons with disabilities to enforce the law through private civil lawsuits. However, it is important to remember that this is the only mechanism established by Congress and the legislature to enforce the ADA and related laws enacted over 33 years ago. But it's not the only mechanism available. You could just contact people. Also, the Americans with Disabilities Act still does not state exactly what is needed for compliance. So website owners still do not know exactly what they need to do. So when we look to the Americans with Disabilities Act, how do we know whether or not we are in compliance? It doesn't contemplate modern digital technology. Regulation has not been issued by the Department of Justice. There are still no laws that apply to private entities that explicitly state what is necessary for compliance. All we have are interpretations. We need a definitive outline of what exactly needs to be done for website owners, for proprietors, places of public accommodation to know how to be compliant. So, and this is, I don't think anybody's opposed to people with disabilities protecting their rights. I think they are opposed to serial litigation and disingenuine litigation at that. It gets to then we have it says a subsection called ADA lawsuits are named ADA lawsuits across the state. California law allows a fine of $4,000 per violation. So what they're getting to here is um, the California UNRRA Civil Rights Act. I think I got that in order. And then it says, and the state leads the nation in the number of ADA lawsuits filed. And so I think this might be general ADA lawsuits, so including physical lawsuits. So those are really just some stats. And then we have another quote by the defense attorney. And then we have the article ends with really like it seems like a throw in, like somewhat unrelated, but they say Senate Bill 585 would change the law so that before someone sues, a small business would have to address the alleged violations within 120 days. The part here though is that I think they intend this to apply to alleged physical violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act and not websites, because if we look at Senate Bill 585, and I have here the date published as May 18th, 2023. So if we look at this bill, and I believe this is the latest version, it seems to be the case, it specifies specifically this bill would prohibit a construction related accessibility claim. So if you read this article, it looks like it's for websites as well, but it's not. And I believe if it was for websites, they would specify internet website accessibility as they have done in AB 1757. So I do not believe that these 120 days of the having 120 days to correct the violation. I don't think this applies to websites. I could be wrong, but that is not how I read this bill. So I wanted to cover this article because there are a few interesting points to this. Of course, we know that small businesses in California have continually faced demand letters and lawsuits, and this ABC7 Eyewitness News really just brings that forward and letting everyone know that this is still happening. It happened, like numerous restaurants have been sued. I know restaurants have been targeted many, many times. So if I were a website owner, right, and I am a website owner, but if I were a small business in California, what you want to do is you want to work towards WCAG conformance, but you also want to work on accessibility because you're not going to be able to become conformant right away. It takes some time. So what you want to do is you want to reduce your risk of litigation by resolving those accessibility issues, fixing those accessibility issues that are most likely to be claimed in litigation. And so what you need to do is, I'll tell you the top three. They are alternative text, they are missing form field labels, the programmatic labels, and then there is keyboard navigability, a lack of keyboard navigability or keyboard navigability issues. Focus on those three. Those are the most likely to lead to litigation. But as I said, my ADA compliance course covers the top 15 issues and then tells you how to continue on to WCAG conformance, because then I have my WCAG course. But it is really important to be proactive. Don't go along with the defeatist notion that the defeatist mindset that nothing can be done. Something can definitely be done. And if nothing else, if you work towards accessibility and improve accessibility, it is going to improve your chances of defending against one of these lawsuits if one should come your way. So that is it. I will include links to my ADA compliance course and WCAG course in the description. I will also include a link to accessible.org where I offer audit, remediation, and user testing services.